Hi, and welcome everybody to the second in our Study and Raise Building Resiliency in the Wake of COVID-19 webinar. Again, we'll use a format of 30 minutes, so it'll be fast and furious. I want to share a little bit about me. Last time we were together, and again, my name is Beth Guyton. Last time we were together, I let you know about 10 years ago, I started Interactive Quality and that I have a real heart and passion for the caregiver on the front line. And today I'd like to share a little bit more about my history so you understand why I started Interactive Quality and why I care so much about the frontline caregiver. So prior to having my consulting firm, I spent over 2 decades as a hospital sales rep for 2 very large companies. And I sold everything from IV pumps and every kind of IV gadget you could imagine to anesthesia drugs, transducers in the critical care area, IV antibiotics. So I spent a lot of time in almost every nook and cranny of a hospital that you can imagine, which really allowed me to have an understanding of what happens inside the hospital setting, but always having an outsider's perspective. And about 18 years ago, I was actually at Big Baylor downtown and was picking up on all kinds of interesting little tidbits of information. They were talking about things like present on admission and core measures. And I became very aware of the new quality movement and value-based purchasing. And I thought, wow, that's kind of interesting because my customer, their world is changing and the way that they get paid is going to change. I better learn a little bit more about that. And what really fascinated me is that I, as a sales rep, had absolutely no authority, would go into an organization as a guest and through brief interactions, oftentimes engaging clinicians and of course using evidence and data, but I would change the way they practice medicine. And yet the organization who employed for sure nurses and other practitioners and had relationships, maybe not employed physicians way back then, but definitely, you know, good relationships with physicians, could not get their clinicians to do the most basic best practice like core measures. So I thought, I have something here. I have a proven method for going into this acute care setting and knowing how to engage and influence behavior at the front line. And so that was really what got me started on interactive quality, and hence the name Interactive Quality. IQ, the smart way to change. And so what my idea was, instead of selling, say, an IV antibiotic, I would help the hospital understand how to sell quality and best practices. And so that's how everything started. And that's why you see that I'm a CPHQ and a Six Sigma Green Belt. I really began this journey with a heavy focus on patient care and quality of care. Over the years, Interactive Quality has done a lot of work with patient experience, and really I've worked so much at the front line with caregivers, but my passion is for them. And of course, I want to see every patient get the most excellent care in every hospital in the United States. But I have always believed with all my heart, unless we take care of the caregivers at the bedside, if their cup is empty, they're not going to be able to give the best care that I know they all want to, and that's what's in their heart, but to their patients. And so that's how things started. And I quickly began to realize that through effective leadership and cultures that can build trust and really help the caregiver bring their absolute best to the table. And as I had mentioned last week, when they go home, that they go home with a strong sense of accomplishment, a feeling like they really made a difference, and that they can derive some joy and just fulfillment from their work experience. So Interactive Quality today still does a fair amount of work with patient experience. We do a lot of leadership development, helping organizations make a more of a high trust and positive culture for their employees. We have a wonderful accountability program. And of course, now we're working with Audrey Cortez on Steady and Raise. So let's move forward. I just wanted you to have that added information and understand my motivation. This is the second, as I said, in 3 different 30-minute webinar sessions. We're going to talk about investigating and supporting to build resiliency, which is, of course, part of the Steady and Raise model. Understand that the Steady and Raise model is evidence-based. It's a proven model developed by Audrey Cortez, who is a very experienced nurse leader. She understands the challenge at the bedside. She also understands the challenge in the administrative suite, how to really implement initiatives and drive change, and that is not easy. What is special about this model is that it really provides a framework through the RAISE piece for organizations to weave resiliency into their culture. So the Steady piece, which I'll go through real quickly here, really are the tools and the strategies for frontline staff, really everyone in the organization, to build so that they can become more resilient as an individual. And the RAISE portion of the model allows leaders to kind of hardwire resiliency into the culture, and offers a framework for an organization who's wanting to support caregivers and have resiliency as part of their culture to really begin to weave that into their culture. So the Steady portion of the model is to seek stories, turn around thoughts, empathize, avoid judgment, don't take it personally, and really we strive to take absolutely nothing personally. And then what you do matters. And that is so empowering because each of us really can make a difference in our circumstances and the circumstances of others, especially patients and coworkers. Now, the RAISE portion of the model is what we're going to focus on a little bit more today, specifically the I for investigate and the S for support. But a quick review: R is for relationship, A is for acknowledge, I for investigate, S for support, and E for involve. I'll just do a very quick recap of relationship. You may remember that we spoke about how important it is as a leader to build a trusting relationship with your followers. You do that by creating a genuine, authentic, meaningful relationship where you connect with each of them as an individual. This is so important. A piece of resiliency is meaningful human connection. And as a leader, you can offer that to each and every one of your followers, and you also role model that. So you kind of set an expectation that, hey, this is how we interact with one another, and this is something that we do for one another. The other piece of the puzzle is to center your interactions with others, especially your followers, in your organization's values and missions. And this is really important for resiliency because another huge component of resiliency is to find meaning and purpose in where you put your energy. Of course, your work, but really your interactions with others, how you go about your business. So through your relationship, you can really hit on two key elements and foster those with your followers. Now, acknowledge is where, as a leader, you take the time to acknowledge and understand to a certain extent what are the stressors for your followers. And remember from last week's session, we talked about how important it is not to judge them, not to compare one person's response to another, certainly not to say, well, that would never bother me. Why on earth would that bother him or her? And we gave away a free tool last week, the Leader's Self-Reflection Guide. And I just wanted to take a moment and say, if you are missing any of these tools, please reach out to me. I will get them to you. And we also have some powerful tools, like we put out an infographic earlier in the week, and all the links to the recordings for these webinars are on the LinkedIn Interactive Quality homepage. So that's a great place to go for resources as well. So back to the Leader Self-Reflection tool, and acknowledging another key part of resiliency is allowing ourselves kind of time to absorb a stressor and all that it means for us. How is it impacting us? How is it changing our reality or our existence going forward? And so a key piece of resiliency is to be very grounded in the present, and that moment of absorption, allowing ourselves a pause and to acknowledge how we are responding to a situation, and in specific, all the stressors that we've undergone with this pandemic, is very important, because if you don't take the time to acknowledge your own feelings, it's going to be very difficult for you to extend that understanding and acknowledgement to others around you. So I strongly encourage you, if you haven't used the tool, take a moment, allow just 15 to 30 minutes to sit down, write out your answers, and think through, what does this mean for me? And it will help you have more empathy for others as you work on acknowledging them. Now, the I is for investigate. You may remember that we talked about, actively seeking out what are the stressors that your staff members are going through. And in healthcare, there are going to be some common stressors. Staffing issues are always an issue, right? Often it's a real team sport, so interpersonal conflict can often be a problem. And there's a lot going on in healthcare, so we have a lot of processes that sometimes are not optimal, maybe even broken, and that can be incredibly frustrating. So you'll see those things, and as a leader, you want to strive to fix what you can fix and what's important for you to fix. But also with investigating, in specific to resiliency, if you want to help build resiliency, remember we talked about being like a private investigator, and you're going to look beneath the surface to understand what's going on. And most of the time, as human beings, we may be riddled with self-doubt, a little bit of insecurity, not having confidence that we can handle a situation, or we are going to be okay in a situation. And that's where it's so important with building resiliency, because a piece of resiliency is self-efficacy, the belief and the confidence that we can handle things. So as a leader, look for that being beneath the surface, and how you can relay the message to your staff members, hey, you're doing a great job. You are enough. What you're doing is making a difference. You're really having an impact for the team, for your patients. I personally appreciate what you did yesterday with Mrs. Smith. Be very specific and allow them to feel empowered and to feel confident in what they're bringing to the table. Now, today we're going to be talking about investigating in a more organized, structured way for your organization. But before we move on to that, I want to remind you that we gave out an active listening tool last week. Again, if you're missing any of these tools, reach out to me. I'm happy to send them to you. This will help your interactions when you're rounding or just visiting with your staff, or even during a staff meeting huddle, be more effective when you're a better listener. And last week, I also talked about a few what I call back pocket questions. I'm going to go over the ones I shared last week and give you a few more. I think it's so important when you're investigating to frame your questions carefully, and of course to pick questions that are comfortable to you, but just so you can get that conversation going. So these are some ideas. What would you say is your biggest stressor right now? What has been the most challenging thing for you during this time? What positive things can you see coming from this hardship or this struggle? I wanted to check in on you to see how you're doing. How are things going for you today? What's the most important thing for me to know or understand today? What is the one thing I can do for you right now? And I'm sure you guys are all clever, so you're noticing a theme here. These questions are centered in the present. That is another key aspect of resiliency. People who are more resilient are firmly grounded in the present. They draw on the past only for wisdom, knowledge, almost like as a resource for what they can bring into the present to help them solve today's problems, and to help them frame what is really unknown, but what's going to happen in the future as optimistic, and to be able to see opportunities in the future. So grounding things in the present is really important. When you engage in these conversations to investigate, the last thing you want to do is fall into like a pit from the past where we are reliving bitterness, feeling wronged, whatever that negative thing is. So that's a key strategy that will help you build resiliency too, is centering things in the present. Okay, so today's topic, and I'll tell you guys, what we're going to cover in the next few slides is very kind of operational and mechanical. So it may not be the absolute most interesting thing, but I'll do the best I can to try to keep it lively. So what we are recommending is that organizations have kind of a formal investigative approach, which would be in the structure of a facilitated sharing session. And the purpose of these sessions is kind of twofold. One is to really listen to what support is needed from your frontline staff. The second is to gather that data so that if, as an organization, you really care about resiliency, trying to mitigate burnout, and supporting your frontline staff, you need to understand what their needs are, and you also need to be able to understand, hey, what's feasible for our organization? What are we able to commit to? And this data that you'll gather from these sessions allows you to really come up with a strategy and to make an educated commitment to building resiliency going forward. So in that way, this is not just a reaction to what's happening now. It's really a strategic move for now and in the future to set the stage for how you drive a different dynamic in your organization. And remember, prior to COVID, burnout has been a huge problem in healthcare, and we've kind of just swept it under the rug. And I think now that's impossible for us to do. We need to pay attention. And as I say that, I want you guys to know, earlier this week we did release an infographic on the Interactive Quality LinkedIn homepage, and that is all pre-COVID data, but it's got some pretty great numbers on there, if you will. If you feel like your organization needs to understand what could the ROI be, what's in it for them, I think that would be a great starting place for a conversation. So I would encourage you to check out that infographic. So let's talk about these facilitated sharing sessions. So you definitely want to have a well-defined agenda that, again, is anchored in your organization's values and mission. Remember, that's important for two reasons. One is it adds meaning and purpose to the energy that's going to be put into this, but it also almost creates like an anchor and a common thread for everybody to get on the same page as to what this is about and why we're doing this. You want to train your facilitators so that the experience of any and every employee that goes to these sharing sessions is incredibly consistent, and of course we want it to be a positive experience. You want to focus on listening for sure. One of the main purposes is to get the valuable insight and wisdom from the front line. What is really needed? It's a great opportunity for you to praise and express gratitude and appreciation for everyone's hard work. And then I spoke earlier about collecting data. This is your opportunity to get really good information. So once again, you can assess that data and aggregate it and discern, hey, what can we commit to? What's a smart strategy for our organization? How can we really make this part of our culture, and what are we willing to commit to going forward? So that's the purpose of these sharing sessions. I would recommend that each session is 60 minutes. Now I'm gonna say, dear webinar listener, do not fall into the trap of thinking that this is like a town hall. Some of the mechanics of it may look like a town hall, but remember, a town hall is really about you getting information out. It is a method of engagement and inclusion, and that will be the case with this, but you're going to go far beyond that because you are collecting valuable data, and you're really there to listen to them more than you're there to tell them something. So I just wanted to say that up front, because I think as we go through this, it could kind of look like a town hall, but it really isn't. And I just wanted to be clear about that. So again, I'm recommending 60 minutes. I think that's enough time for people to feel like they had an opportunity to share their thoughts, but not so much time that, as I had mentioned earlier, you might fall into the pit of the past and get to where things could be super negative. We don't want to do that. If your organization is small enough and it's feasible for your CEO and senior team to go to each session and they can present a very consistent welcome and thank you, that's awesome. But I also think it's really good to create a video, and it can be your CEO or your whole senior team. You want them to, again, define the purpose of these sharing sessions, anchor it in the organization's values and mission, and thank people for being willing to participate. And then you would have a thank you video at the end that would do the same thing, but also describe what the follow-up will be. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. I also recommend that you have a duo facilitator team. So you have a speaker and a scribe. And I say that because one of the big objectives is to really create this powerful dialogue, to build trust, to allow people to feel heard. And that will be the speaker's primary responsibility. The scribe, and it's not easy to be a good scribe in this type of situation, is going to be responsible for gathering the data. And they're going to need to organize that data in a way that it can easily be categorized and aggregated when it all comes back in. And some of you guys may be in pretty large organizations, and you may end up having 20 to 30 of these sessions. So it's going to be a lot of information to sort through. And if it's gathered in a more structured way, in a better way, it's going to be easier to sort through. So that is really critical. And you want to give good attention to both the listening piece and the gathering data piece. And I've kind of already alluded to the last point on this slide, but you want to have a tight process for gathering data that is consistent. So I'm going to give everybody a sample agenda, and we're going to go over that next, but that'll be one of the tools you'll get at the end of today. So we got 60 minutes to work with. I'm envisioning the facilitators introducing themselves and just welcoming everyone and thanking them, kind of queuing up the video that would be coming from your senior team, and then back to the facilitators where they'll kind of go through the expectations of the rest of the time together and the logistics, and clearly say, hey, we want your feedback, we want your ideas. Going forward, it's important for us to support staff and really build that into our culture and our way of operating. We want to know what kind of support would be meaningful to you on an organizational level, from your immediate supervisor, so a leader level, and then let's talk about how peers can support one another. And when you queue up these conversations, you probably want to not just open it up to anything, but frame it in a positive way by asking, let's get started by thinking of a couple of things that our organization did that was meaningful to you during this tough time. And so in that way, then you can kind of set things up to be positive. You also want to reserve at least 8 to 10 minutes to say, hey, every time as human beings we're confronted with a huge challenge, we're kind of pushed to innovate, and good things can come from the bad. And you may be able to throw out some things that you already know occurred in your organization that's really great. Like I know one organization that talked about how they'd never had such incredible hand hygiene practices. So that's a positive. I know another organization that was really in front of their concern for family members not being able to visit patients. So they came up with a system where they made sure that someone on the care team reached out to a family member every 4 hours. And you know what? Their patient experience scores shot up. So what are some of the great things that happen? And you would love to close things out on that positive note where people can feel really good about themselves and the organization. And then of course you would have a closing video from your senior team or your CEO. Again, just thanking everybody for participating, and let them know this is going to be a closed loop situation. You're going to get feedback. So be specific. It could sound like we're going to take the next 6 weeks to assimilate all the data that comes in from the 24 sessions that we're conducting. We're going to look very closely at what support you're asking for, and we're going to make a commitment as an organization, and we'll be communicating that back to you. You'll see communications on our intranet in a video from me. Your leader will be sharing that with you in staff meetings, in August, whatever the situation is going to be, but make sure that you're making at least a commitment to get feedback back to the people. Now, it's so important that facilitators are incredibly well trained. So what does that look like? Make sure everybody's on the same page. What's the purpose of these sessions? And that you sync that, and that there's a very explicit definition of success. Talk about, concrete things like a session is successful if we have at least 8 people attend. A session is successful if, even if there's negativity, as a facilitator team, you can turn that around to something positive and people leave feeling uplifted. Whatever that definition of success is for your organization, really make sure everyone that's going to be facilitating is clear on that. Get the agenda that works best for you, review that agenda, I spoke a lot about the speaker and scribe facilitator team roles. Make sure that you give good training to both of those people. The process for gathering data is super important, and the scribes will probably need just a little bit of practice. And so it's good to brainstorm what the categories might be, how you'll frame those things. And so then as the scribe is hearing comments, they can begin to kind of frame them in the categories that you all are anticipating. That doesn't mean if someone throws an idea out from left field that it's ignored, not at all. It is still recorded, but the more data that can come in that's well organized, the easier it's going to be to aggregate it and to come up with a good strategy from it. Anticipate tough questions and comments that might be thrown out there, and how you would like the facilitators and how they would like to respond to them. And you might even want to train people on techniques for diffusing negativity or high emotion. Now we're going to move on to the S, because we're investigating so we know how to support. So supporting is really, you know, in the sense of the RAISE model, it's about how do we coach and build people, how do we actively listen, understand what their concerns are, really know what's going on with them. So by doing good investigating, we're setting the stage to be able to do that. Hopefully you've gathered some really good information. You've had awesome scribes and speakers, and so you've got great data to work with. You're going through that data, you're assessing what they're asking for. You might even say, well, if they're asking for this, these might be some concrete metrics we could shoot for. And you can ask, is that feasible for our organization? What resources do we have? And then putting all that together, you can really come up with what is your strategy to build resiliency, and what is the commitment that you're able to make as an organization. And you want to just make sure that that commitment is really meaningful to the front line. So if you use the data that they gave you and you communicate back in terms of the messages you heard from them, you're going to be spot on. And of course, you want it to be feasible. It's got to be a win-win for the organization and the employee. And then you're going to want to effectively communicate that back. Another tool that we're going to send out today is just a template for communication. It's a four-way communication tool. I'm quickly going to go over the different elements that are on there. I know some organizations have great systems for communication, but I've also worked with a lot of organizations that were grateful to have this tool. So the tool pushes you to identify your target audience, to identify at least 4 channels of communication. And it pushes you to choose one rich method of communication. So a lean method of communication is one way. It might be taking a flyer and posting it in a break room, or shooting out a text message to your whole team, or an email. A rich form of communication allows for the receiver to ask questions. I mean, ideally, the richest communication would be a one-on-one interaction or meeting, but even things like a morning huddle is a rich form of communication, because it's happening in person and it allows someone the opportunity to ask for details, for more information, to question things. So you get the idea, but you want to at least have one rich form of communication. It pushes you to identify the key elements of your message, and then to summarize in a very simple, succinct, memorable sentence, maybe 2 sentences at the most, what is the message? You then identify who's responsible for sharing the message and who they're supposed to share it with. And then you identify any tools and support materials for sharing the message. So by having a single, succinct, memorable message, your leaders should be going out and sharing the same message. That's the idea behind that. Tools could be a video on your intranet. It could be a pre-made flyer that you're asking every leader to hang up. It could be a slide deck with really great notes for them to present at their staff meeting. So think about what are the key elements of the commitment that you want to make sure it gets out, and how you can do that in a very effective way. And then the final part of the RAISE model is E for evolve. And as a leader, one of the greatest challenges is to help staff members kind of embrace change, and we're always confronted with change. So getting everybody on the same page and moving forward. And of course, we talked last week about how important it is for you to model a positive attitude towards change, and being agile in your thinking and your behaving. And so that's really a key piece of that model. And it's so important again, to reinforce with people, change is part of, our life. It can be really healthy and positive. Great innovations can come from change. Help focus on the positive. And anytime you can build up their confidence and their ability to manage change, that's always really positive as well. And I'd just like to remind everybody, I think this is so important to think about to define resiliency, that when we are resilient, we're able to interact with our environment and its stressors in an optimistic and adaptive way, with a focus on purpose, human connection, and personal growth. If anybody has any questions, I would love to take them now, and I'm just going to pause for a minute to look and see if we have any questions coming in. All right, we just have one question, and someone is asking if interactive quality can help facilitate these types of sharing sessions. And of course, we would, as long as we have the capacity, we're happy to do that. And we also can help an organization train their facilitators if that's something that they're interested in doing. So I just want to thank everybody for tuning in. The next webinar is going to be a lot of fun. It's on storytelling, and Audrey Cortez, who is one of the absolute best storytellers I have ever met, is going to join me. So we'll go through how to create a good strategic narrative as a leader. We'll listen to Audrey tell some stories, and then we'll look and see how she hit the key points on excellent storytelling. Thank you all so much for tuning in. It's always a pleasure. Take care.